Okay, conserving water and protecting fish habitat. Yeah, I spent a lot of time with this guy standing beside me, the techie. We holler at him for everything, I gotta tell you. He's a wealth of information and probably one of the most directed young people I've had the pleasure of working with. Graham and I can sit down and figure out an agenda and decide what's going on in pretty short order. But he is a pleasure to work with. Please welcome Graham Watt.
Thank you, Dave. So I'm trying a bit of a different format here. I like experimenting, some of you might know, and it keeps me interested in the technology. So if you have any questions about what I've done, we can talk offline after. So starting with a little bit of geography, can anyone tell me what the turquoise outlined area is here on this map of Western North America? Hey, there we go. And where are we? We're in it. But we're out of the Columbia Basin Trust. It's a loaded question. So we're part of the Upper Columbia Watershed, though not everyone knows that. And the Upper Columbia also includes this whole big Kootenay area and areas like the Flathead, which of course comes from here, goes way south before going west again. So we're part of a really big geography, and there's a lot going on, people discussing the Columbia River right now. So it's very exciting to be working on one of the sub-watersheds. Zooming in a little bit, and then we'll get to the presentation. The Kettle River watershed is a sub-basin within the Columbia that drains in, of course, down at Kettle Falls, just north of Kettle Falls. Includes most of it's in Canada, and it's most of the RDKB. There's a small amount of the North Okanagan Regional District up here, and a portion that's down in the States, a few of the sub-watersheds there. This talk today, a little bit about me. I'm a watershed planner by way of geography. So I think about the world through a lens of intersecting layers of ideas, of history, of ecology, of substrata, and there's a lot of different disciplines that I've come across coming at this, and it's a really neat place to be. So thinking about that lens of different layers, we're going to explore some of the layers today and that we're dealing with in the watershed plan, some of the key issues that have come up and how we're talking about addressing them as we get into making recommendations. So bear with me for a spin around the block. So the Kettle River Watershed Management Plan is an initiative of the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary to first of all study the water supply, water use, quality, and the aquatic ecosystems. And that was our phase 1, State of the Watershed. It's available online, as you know, kettleriver.ca, State of Watershed. And that was released, finalized a little over a year ago. And so you've heard me probably speak on this before. Neat thing is we've been able to keep on learning about some of the issues that were in there, and I'll share some of those results today. What I was brought on to do was coordinate the planning for the future, so developing recommendations with stakeholders on policy, planning, and stewardship. And really, the stakeholders in here is an incredible network of people, many of whom are in this room, and a lot of you have said that you're involved. Maybe can you just stand for a moment if you're on one of our committees? Okay, there's a bit of overlap here. That's awesome. Thank you so much. It would not work without you at all. So I think of the watershed planning in sort of 5 phases of work. One of them is understanding the watershed issues, and that's fundamentally the state of the watershed. There's also surveys and public meetings and that kind of thing. Then we get down to it and work on the goals. What are the priorities and goals? And we did that largely through the spring. I did analysis of the survey results that came over Christmas, and I guess in March reported on those. We had some large draft goals and then start developing those into finer scale goals and some of the priorities that we're working on. And really what we're working on now is watershed solutions. So how do we actually address some of these issues that were brought up and I'm going to talk about in a moment? It's really great to have the Christina Lake Stewardship Society having gone through this at a sub-basin scale, because the regional district the leadership involved in the regional district through Grace and many others, they get what watershed planning is about. And this is such a refreshing thing as a planner, coming into a place where they get it, they'll back it, they'll go to bat for it. So I really appreciate that. What's next, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but as we go through a number of iterations around these recommendations over the next few months, we'll be drafting a watershed plan and working on implementation planning. So by next summer, basically, there will be some documents that you can hold in your hand. I should note, I'm fairly often in the papers. I've been trying to do a column every couple of weeks. Sometimes it's not always there on the second week. But if there's any issues that you'd like to see raised in a column, what's going on in the watershed, please just chat to me, plan@kettleriver.ca or 442-4111 in regard to the office. So moving along into issues, this was a slide from the Phase 1 report, and I keep on coming back to it because it's one of the key issues for the Kettle watershed. And that's the average year, we're doing fine most of the year. In the dry year, we're not, and neither are the fish. That's kind of what it comes down to. The river dries out really, really quickly. So during a regular average year, you'll see, not a really lot of impact of water use on the actual flows. So the difference between net flow, that's what's in the river, versus naturalized flow, that's what would be in the river if you didn't take it all out and irrigate your land and put it into storage and various things. Not that we have much storage. So you look at in an average year overall, we're up there about 80 cubic meters a second over the year, just down the hill here at Cascade. That's where this Station 7 is. But in a 10-year net low flow and a 50-year net low flow, you can see that there starts to be a bit of a bit more of a loss of water over the whole year. But really, when you get down to September, when you have those low flows in September, a 50-year low flow is similar amount to the amount of water that is actually used. If you look at the difference between the net, what's in there, and the amount that would be there, that's a similar quantity there. That means that the total amount of water that we're actually using is about the same as what's in the river itself. But of course, we use a lot of groundwater. So the groundwater has a real buffer from the surface flows, and that means that there's a lag before that shows up. There's a bit of a storage effect there. In fact, it's our greatest reservoir, and I'll be talking a little bit more groundwater in a moment. So keep that in mind. I think that in terms of our water quantity, we have to be always thinking about those extremes, the 50, 100-year, 1,000-year drought. What does that look like? 3 or 4 years of drought in a row like we had a couple times in the 90s, 2003, 2009. That's kind of a worry to think about. Anyways, we'll move on. Waiting for the effect. Who here was at our forum at the end of September at Christina Lake? Was there a number of people here? Greg Utzig was our keynote presenter, and this is one of the slides. He talked about and he's one of the people that's been studying the effect of climate change on the ecosystems of the boundary and the West Kootenays overall. He's been doing absolutely incredible work. So basically, you can think about this is your bell curve, it's frequency, right? So the higher the bell is, the higher the spot in the bell, the more often that happens. So basically, historically, we could imagine that we had an average set of conditions. We had a certain set of conditions that we saw a lot of the time. Occasionally we'd see some extreme cold, occasionally we'd see some extreme warm, but overall things balanced out. As we move forward to more warming and more effects from that warming, what the models and already experience is showing, we're seeing more record hot weather, much more hot weather, and a more variable middle. So the average isn't an average anymore. It's a real moving target of a lot flatter kind of things, where we might see any year from year to year we'll be having a lot of different extremes and way less of this extreme cold weather. That might have an effect on the mountain pine beetle, among other pests, of course. Thinking how that plays out in our watersheds and our landscapes, we haven't had one of these in the Kettle River watershed for a while, but of course Kelowna did back in 2003. And I think a lot about fuel loadings. I think about the effects of large fires on sediment and watershed health and that kind of thing, not to mention the effects of fighting those fires and the impacts in our communities. So this is one of those interfaces, those layers that watershed planning needs to take into account. I hope there's no vertigo here. So this is another one of the slides from Greg's presentation. I've warped it and stretched it so it fit the screen there. But we heard about some other critters coming up from, you know, the Southwest and the Midwest and various places. Well, it turns out whole parts of our ecosystems might be in the future as well, because when we look 50 to 80 years in the future, we have a lot of the climate envelopes that will be common here are similar to, you know, southern Montana, northern Utah, those scrublands of southwestern and southeastern Idaho. So how will those ecosystems look on this landscape? How will the species do? And overall, the climate envelopes that produce the forests that we have will no longer exist in 80 years. So it's a very good question about what we're planting. It's also going to be the question, what comes after those species that are harvested? So it's a long-term question here. But what happens, of course, is we have the fires, we have the floods, we have the debris flows that come down on our landscapes and our communities, and those disturbances take out pieces of forest and pieces of our communities. And what comes next? That's some of our questions. This has a huge impact on fish, and this is from a presentation that Tara White, she's a senior fisheries biologist with Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations. I occasionally say forlorn, and I think that's a problem. You know, we've got a great mascot here for the zebra mussel. I think we need to have a mad trout banner, and MAD is mean annual discharge. When you get below a certain point of mean annual discharge, or the amount of water that you'd expect to see in the river over the average of the year, when you get down to about 20%, that's still a pretty sweet spot for the fish, for the trout and the whitefish in the river. They still have lots of width to work with in the river. The oxygen's still pretty good, and they've got lots of places to hang out. As you get down to 10% mean annual discharge, things start to get a little bit constricted in some spots. And it turns out that if you want to start curtailing water use or dealing with trying to regulate to have an effect on this, this is where you really have to be thinking, is this curve between 20% and 10% of your mean annual discharge. Once you get down to 7.5%, we start to see some real issues start to occur in terms of, you know, and below that down to 5, where basically, you know, you can walk right across the river at Midway and there's not going to be any fish in there, let alone, you know, invertebrate production and different things. So we have some really good discussion right now with Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations about what new fisheries regulations, water use regulations, some of the different tools that the province has for supporting the fish flows and supporting the fish in here. What can we do as a community and a region to actually get ahead of that? You know, what's our role in terms of education, in terms of stewardship, in terms of water conservation? You know, the leadership of Grand Forks in, you know, getting into water metering, for instance. If all our communities and water purveyors were able to start taking these kind of steps, then maybe we would need to get to the strict regulatory response that the province has at their fingertips. So that's kind of some of the discussions that we're having at the stakeholder advisory group. Where do we go from here? Let's see what's next here. Yes. So I'm going to turn. I have to turn one layer off. If I had made this a tour, it would all be so smooth. Jenny's going to talk about this. These pimples on the landscape are places where streams are crossed by roads. Not all those roads are active, not all the streams flow all year round, but when you take together the 14 or 15,000 kilometers of roads in the Canadian portion of our watershed, noting of course here's Gladstone, and here's Granby Wilderness, and here's that kind of Almond Mountain area that's kind of inaccessible. When you take all of those roads and you put them together with all their streams, there's a lot of places where sediment can get in our rivers. So when we talk about long-term forestry planning, what's the role of being stewards of the resource roads? How are we actually going to take care of those? What's the kind of dialogue that needs to happen between, you know, the regions and the province about making this work more effectively? We also need to work with the recreation community, who also depends on these and getting out to the places they like to go to. I think if you come in and say, we're going to close your trails, it might not go so well. But if we present the issues and look for the problems together, I hope we can find the solutions together. We did have a talk the other day at the Trails Agreement meeting, and I think there's some room for work to happen there. I'll turn that info layer off. Magic. But of course, roads aren't the only issue. Whoa, I'm spiraling in. Down the drain, another one bites the dust. Hopefully no one knows exactly where this is, because then you could probably figure it out if you know the site. This was last year in the winter time, showing a nice little wetland, a bit of water in it. You can see the cattails around here, and various willows and aspens and that kind of thing. And now it's been filled in, basically lost. So this is, I don't actually, it even hurts a little bit. I have a kind of emotional connection. I've studied wetlands for years and worked in some of the most damaged prairie landscapes where, you know, 80% of the wetlands are lost. In the Okanagan, I was at a meeting of the Region 8 wetland, so the Okanagan Wetland Conservation Strategy meeting last week, and 85% of their wetlands that were there historically are gone due to development, due to farming, due to draining. Thankfully, we're not there, but we actually don't have any picture of how many wetlands we've lost. We've got a really poor idea of how they're doing, and there isn't an awareness by landowners, by contractors, such as the person who would have done this. There isn't an awareness about what the laws are and you know, what the responsibilities are of people living by water. So that is a segue, of course, to Jenny's talk, which is coming up shortly. This is a wetland and a riparian area. I will be writing about this scenario, hypothetically, what it means and what we need to do about it. So please, if you want to talk more about that, or if you have other ones. But if you ever see something like this happen, use that rap card, because this is really, really important. We don't want to end up like the Okanagan.
What's that body of water below? Is that a river?
It is a river.
Is that the Kettle?
It is the Kettle River.
Yeah.
See if I jumped here. I do want to say we are doing something, which is really exciting. This is the Wetland Keepers Workshop that happened in June. There's a few of us out in the field there. You can see Lisa and Brenda and a bunch of us in there.
Swamping it.
Yeah, swamping it. We were having a good time in there. That was the beginning of a long conversation about wetlands in the boundary. It looks like that the BC Wildlife Federation actually has funding to come here next spring and do some planning on inventorying and policy and planning needed for wetlands in the boundary, and start taking steps toward a wetland conservation strategy here, like they're working on in the Okanagan. So that's really exciting, and so that conversation will continue. And I think I'm going to slip over the next slide. There's just not enough time to talk about nitrates. But I'll just show you. So this is kind of the Grand Forks aquifer area. You can see that the map extends to wrapped around the valley. Nitrates, this map is a few years old, though still relevant. It seems that nitrates in these locations have, for the most part, either stabilized or are decreasing. So changing land use, changing amounts of fertilizer going on. I think it's a good news story that the graphs that are showing. However, we haven't had any monitoring of nitrates for the last few years, and it's unclear what the future role of the monitoring will be. We also don't have a lot of information along with other things that are in our aquifers that we might want to know about. So we're actually having some really neat conversations right now with people in the city of Grand Forks and Sion and Grand Forks Irrigation District about what kind of possibilities are there for working together on the regulatory aspects that are coming up from interior health, for instance, as well as all of the issues of monitoring and groundwater protection that are coming to these areas. So I think I'm going to finish with this slide right here, which is where we are now and what our next steps are. So in early September, we released the first of a few discussion papers. It's on our website as well. It's a 20 or 25 page document. Actually, I was really impressed when I was out at the Rock Creek Fall Fair. I had a stack of these on the table, and almost all of them were gone. I'm like, what? Are people eating kindling or something? I'm not sure. But people seem interested in where we're going with this. So this gave an overview of the goals and the type of strategies that we're considering. And I'm chewing really hard through 2.5 other ones right now. So the stakeholder advisory group will be completing discussion of those in January and moving on to the next topic. So what's on the table right now is the water conservation and fisheries that we discussed, some discussion about storage and future growth, that kind of scenario storage needs. We'll be talking about governance, talking about groundwater protection, and last but not least, we'll be talking about riparian and aquatic ecosystems. And of course, that's a segue. So if you have any questions about that aspect in particular, we can hold them until after Jenny talks, but if there's anything about any other parts of the watershed plan and what we're doing, otherwise Jenny and I can address them together.
So, for the water management plan for Kettle River, what are the goals and objectives? To conserve water or what?
Yeah, absolutely. Like water conservation is a huge part of it. I can actually pull up this. I should pull up the document here. There's basically discussion paper here. Won't go into the big thing. There's several kind of overall goals that we discussed. One of them is healthy aquatic ecosystems that sustain native biodiversity and aquatic life. So that's the flow regimes and water levels. That's the excellent water quality and the quality habitat in wetlands, riparian areas, and uplands, associated uplands. There's the safe and secure water supporting healthy communities. So that's the security of drinking water, that's safe water-based recreation, community enjoyment, expression of spiritual, cultural heritage, and aesthetic values, stable shorelines, and resilient floodplain land use. And the third overall goal is reliable and adequate flows of clean water supporting a sustainable economy and food system. So that's the overall kind of, adequate water quality and supplies to support current and future uses within sustainable levels. And this is available on kettleriver.ca. We get into a bunch of details about, the challenges to achieving those goals, which are large. This isn't an overnight problem to fix. And then the kind of strategies that we're considering, and those are principally related to building our capacity, working on improving the quality of our water supply, developing the watershed function, fixing the watershed function where it's broken, and building our recreational cultural values around water. So that's kind of the scope of the planning work is contained in that first discussion paper, and then we're ironing out the details in subsequent discussion papers.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Larry. And Brady's available for any questions anytime. All you have to do is give him a holler, and he's happy to chat with you.